to get that daily news. I ain't watching TV, I'ma log on to YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Talking about that raw, uncut news. You a fool. You believe in mainstream and local news. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. And 411, keep the 411. On a sensitive subject, keep it 100. Don't bite no tongue. If you cannot take the truth, then this is finna hurt. Who's to say if it's a round or a flat earth? Stick to the facts. What's some feelings? I don't do no capping. Read that paper, seen that news. Now you know what happened. Playing a pretty picnic, but they control that weather. Same crisis actors, like we don't know no better. Thing about the truth always come to the light. Problem is too many, all bark, no bite. Like muscle, no might. I don't know what happened to them, but I know the way they said somebody ain't right. It's time to get that daily news. I ain't watching TV, I'ma log on to YouTube. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Talking about that raw, uncut news. You a fool. You believe in mainstream and local news. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe. Like, share, and subscribe.
Tonight, a major White House push to surge vaccine doses to every state and territory, increasing by 16% the weekly vaccine supply that's sent to states, from 8.6 million doses to at least 10 million for the next 3 weeks, and giving states 3 weeks' notice on how many doses they'll receive so they can adjust their distribution plans.
This is going to allow millions of more Americans to get vaccinated sooner than previously anticipated.
The Biden administration also buying another 200 million doses from vaccine makers Pfizer and Moderna over the summer, pushing the government's vaccine purchases to 600 million, enough to give 300 million Americans 2 shots.
It's going to take months before we can get the majority of Americans vaccinated. Months.
For weeks, long lines for vaccinations have quickly dissolved into empty lots with doses running out. Millions of Americans, especially seniors, eager for vaccine protection. Many, like 79-year-old Paula Finkel in Massachusetts, still can't even get an appointment.
I'm going to try and get up at around 3 o'clock in the morning and see if I can get a reservation for my first shot.
Florida's governor says 22% of his state's 65 and older seniors have received at least 1 shot, but demand far exceeds what the federal government sends each week.
We're at the mercy of whatever is sent. So if they send 500,000 first doses instead of 266, I can double the drive-through sites. I can give more to hospitals.
In Northern Virginia, Inova Hospital's vaccination center was largely empty today after canceling plans to vaccinate 1,000 school teachers when too few doses arrived.
That's, to me, the biggest question of the day. Where are all these vaccine doses? And I think that every American citizen deserves the right to know where all these doses are.
The government says Moderna is primarily behind the effort to push more vaccine out faster. And Pfizer says with enough vaccine for a 6th dose in each vial, it can also increase vaccine supply faster, delivering its first 200 million doses before the end of June as originally promised. Meanwhile, a third vaccine maker, Johnson & Johnson, a single shot that should dramatically ramp up inoculation rates.
Johnson & Johnson's first one-shot COVID vaccine is offering the world a potentially new weapon against the mutating virus. Data shows that the vaccine is 72% effective against moderate and severe COVID-19 in the U.S. and 85% effective in preventing serious symptoms in global trials.
In this moment, what are we trying to get to? We are trying to get to herd immunity. We are not actually trying perfection. There is an efficacy advantage of Moderna and Pfizer, but the 1-dose, 2-dose thing may end up pushing Johnson & Johnson over with an advantage to get it into people quickly.
But there are concerns tonight over its less than 60% efficacy rate in South Africa. That highly contagious variant is now in the U.S.
This is a wake-up call that we will continue to see the evolution of mutants. So that means that we will have to be nimble to be able to just adjust readily to make versions of the vaccine.
Today, Dr. Fauci said children under 16 could get vaccinated by early summer.
The Conference of Catholic Bishops claim the vaccine is linked to cells derived from aborted fetal tissue, and that raises moral concerns because of the church's opposition to abortion. Johnson & Johnson says there is no fetal tissue in its vaccine and that it's used an engineered cell line. NBC News says those cells are generally replicated from original cells taken 4 decades ago from fetal tissue. In a statement, the bishops write, in part, if one has the ability to choose a vaccine, Pfizer or Moderna's vaccines should be chosen over Johnson & Johnson's.
Is it true aborted fetal cell lines were used to create the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine? The Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth is standing by the National Diocese, which is telling church members to avoid the new vaccine if another is available due to moral concerns. The statement says the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was developed, tested, and/or produced with the help of abortion-derived cell lines. Our sources are 2 experts in the Texas medical field, Dr. Mark Casanova from the Dallas County Medical Society and Dr. Ashley Garling from UT's College of Pharmacy. We can verify aborted fetal cells were used in the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine.
These cells are reproduced and grown literally day after day and used in a lot of research.
The cells in this vaccine have been multiplied millions of times for decades, which is where we get the term fetal cell lines. Scientists like to use fetal cell lines as hosts because they're still in development and will replicate more rapidly outside the human body. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine uses what's called an adenovirus, which is a benign common cold virus. It enters your cells with genetic instructions for your body to make the signature spike protein on SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Your body then sees this and makes antibodies that would fight the real COVID-19 virus. So we can verify aborted fetal cell lines were used to create the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. The statement from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says if you cannot get a different COVID-19 vaccine, it is morally permissible to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine.
Yeah, and to do that, the White House is talking about using the Defense Production Act to require companies to help with everything from vaccines to PPE to syringes, all to get more vaccines into arms.
We're in a crisis.
As Friday's jobs report revealed more signs of a slowing economy, President-elect Joe Biden said there's no time to lose.
This situation is urgent. If we don't act now, the future will be very bleak. Americans need help, and they need it now.
The president-elect said he was confident he could get Republicans to go big on additional economic measures once he takes office. But
that this bill has been discussed and debated. It's clear that an overwhelming percentage of the American people, Democrats, independents, our Republican friends, have made it clear, the people out there, made it clear they strongly support the American Rescue Plan. Yesterday, with the final passage of the plan in the House of Representatives, their voices were heard and reflected in everything we have in this bill. And I believe this is, and most people I think do as well, this historic legislation is about rebuilding the backbone of this country and giving people in this nation, working people, middle-class folks, people who built the country, a fighting chance. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. There's an entire generation coming up that is learning from what you've done. I don't just mean learning about how to deal with a virus. Learning about it makes a difference to tell the truth, to follow the science, and just wherever it takes you, and just be honest about it. We're at 535,217 dead as of last night. It's got to stop, but you're slowing it. It's stopping. And it really, really matters. You know, that's more people than have died in all of Americans, all of World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, and 9/11 combined in a year. So there's a thing called the Defense Production Act. As president, I'm allowed to enforce it. So I had people saying, stop making that and start making these. We found we put together, did you ever think you'd see the day, because you've all been involved in medicine, see two major drug companies cooperate for the good of the country? One come up with a drug, and the other say, well, we'll manufacture for you. You remember when I said my goal was to have 100 million shots in people's arms in the first 100 days as president? And I mean it. One word: possibilities. Possibilities. That's what you guys believe in, possibilities, based on science and hard data. And so I just thank you for not only your intellectual skills, but your heart. And I shouldn't have done that because I wanted to yield to my vice president, who's smarter than I am.
Well, there's not much to add to that, Mr. President.
Oh, just sorry. Now, when President Harris and I took a virtual tour of a vaccination center in Arizona not long ago, we deployed nearly 6,000 federal personnel. We've got to reach the point where we have herd immunity, meaning where we have a vast majority of the American people have been vaccinated. Don't let what you see happening in Europe and you see on television. This is a person who was ready on day one to be president of the United States of America.
The Harris administration, together with Joe Biden.
My name's Joe Biden. I'm Jill Biden's husband, and I am Kamala's running mate. The fact is that the bills that the future president here, that the senator is talking about, are bills that were passed years ago, and they're passed overwhelmingly. You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
You have to say quite clearly, don't come.
Yes, I can say quite clearly, don't come. And what we're in the process of getting set up, don't leave your town or city or community.
Those same draconian policies put in place by the Trump administration essentially created a time bomb here. They bottled up asylum seekers in Mexico waiting to get across the border.
The Biden administration considering extreme action, well, they're talking about it, to tackle the border crisis.
Officials reportedly weighing whether to fly the influx of immigrants to the Canadian border for processing.
Wow. Griffin.
Do you think more will come under the new administration?
It's not going to stop. Ever. It's not going to stop.
You know, the Trump administration really turned around a bad situation with this stay in Mexico policy and a lot of other moves that stemmed the flow. And yet now you hear the Biden administration blaming the Trump administration for what's happening at the border. What do you make of that?
I think it's crazy. I mean, if you look at what Trump did over a period of 4 years, it was really remarkable. I haven't seen a president do a better job with stemming the tide of illegal immigration, and he did it in all kinds of different ways, from encouraging Border Patrol to do their jobs and empowering them, and then starting to build the wall, and then just sending the message, hey, you're not going to come here and just sneak into our country. This asylum thing, you're going to wait in Mexico or somewhere else instead of getting this deal where you just disappear. So now that Biden has undone all of that, we can see the consequences, and they're pretty devastating, and it's pretty amazing that now he would blame Trump when he did just the opposite of Trump, and it hasn't worked.
And, you know, the interesting thing about the stay in Mexico policy, by the way, that's what I think turned around the caravans. The caravans practically on the day that bill was signed. And
well, there's no doubt that policy that worked, and that Mexico benefited from it as well, along with the people coming up in the caravans who were risking their lives and who were involved sometimes with drug trafficking and smuggling of humans, it worked really well for the entire country and really for our border countries.
And by the way, I have heard, and maybe you can correct me, that almost 100% of the kids who are coming over unaccompanied are being controlled by the drug cartels for various reasons. One, they get paid almost as much in human traffic as they do in drug traffic, but also it allows them to sort of direct the attention of Border Patrol towards individuals. Of course, they want to save the lives of children, so that allows them to busy the Border Patrol with taking care of the kids while they're smuggling drugs at a different part of the border. Is that true?
Well, you know, I don't know for sure, but it certainly seems to be the case. It's a very smart strategy because you're right. It detracts from their focus on protecting the border and pushes them to focus on these thousands of kids who need to be taken care of, who are at risk of being hurt and harmed.
Homeland Security officials are worried the president's new immigration actions may create a surge of illegal crossings. The administration announced a 100-day pause on most deportations last week, citing the need to kind of reevaluate how things have been working. The former acting Homeland Security told Maria Bartiromo that these moves may backfire.
But I've asked her, the VP today, because she's the most qualified person to do it, to lead our efforts with Mexico and the Northern Triangle and the countries that help. We're going to need help in stemming the movement of so many folks, stemming the migration to our southern border. And, you know, back when I was vice president, I got a similar assignment, but one of the things we did was we made sure that we got a bipartisan agreement with Democrats and Republicans to provide over $700 million to the countries in the Northern Triangle to determine the best way to keep people from coming is keep them from wanting to leave. And the reason why so many people were leaving, we learned, was that not only gang violence and trafficking cartels, but natural disasters, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes. And so it's not like someone sits around a hand union table somewhere in Guatemala and says, I got a great idea, let's sell everything we have, give the money to a coyote, have them take our kids or us to the border of America, take us across, leave us in the desert, we don't speak the language. Won't that be fun? One of the ways we learned is that if you deal with the problems in country, it benefits everyone. It benefits us, it benefits the people, it grows the economy there.
Tonight, Mississippi's governor just responding to the president, saying Mississippians don't need handlers. At least 11.
Because when it comes to this pandemic and the economic recovery, we are not Democrats or Republicans. We are Americans, and we will be there for one another.
The country is still in a crisis, and there's a dark winter still ahead. There was a real desire for a real partnership between the states and the federal government. States and communities shouldn't have to lay off teachers, cops, firefighters, cut vital services for families and businesses. Delivering a safe and equitable and free vaccine. It took 8 months to provide 100 million COVID tests. 8 months to provide COVID tests. Just imagine how much more difficult it will be, they pointed out, if we don't find a more efficient and effective way to provide 330 million vaccinations. The governors talked about how getting doses of vaccine distributed is just one step. We have to actually get vaccinations into the arms of 330 million Americans. That takes enormous resources, people, product. It's going to take time. It's going to take coordination. It's going to take the federal government and state governments working hand in glove, working together. The governors all emphasized we need to be clear with the American people about what to expect. No false expectations. Let them know what we anticipate. They all acknowledge that this is going to take a massive public education campaign. And we also need to reach traditionally underserved communities that are being hardest hit by the pandemic. Black, brown, Latino, Latin American community, Native American communities, small towns, rural communities. We discussed the need to help states with Title 32 funding for the National Guard. That's a fancy way of saying governors Governors need to be able to get funding when they need to bring their National Guard into play. And National Guards are going to have to play this. It costs a lot of money. And governors need that paid for. Governor discussed the need for funding when waiving certain FEMA fees. The fact is that this is a national emergency. That's what FEMA is supposed to deal with. Our view is that should be done. When it comes to deploying the National Guard or COVID or real relief, that should be paid for. We have to not only deal with this pandemic, we have to plan for the next one. The idea that viruses are going to go away is just not rational. We're going to recalibrate and set up the institutional structures we had in our administration of Obama-Biden and build on it.
President Biden tonight reacting to news that Texas and Mississippi are lifting all restrictions and mask mandates.
I think it's a big mistake. The last thing we need is the Neanderthal thinking that in the meantime everything's fine, take off your mask, forget it.
His public health officials also doubling down, pointing to another uptick in cases and deaths, with variants threatening to, quote, hijack our success.
I think that was ill-advised. It is really quite risky.
Stamina has worn thin. Fatigue is winning. Every individual is empowered to do the right thing here, regardless of what the states decide.
At least 11 states recently moving to relax restrictions.
Now, in Texas and across the country, we now have vaccines to protect Texans from COVID.
But in reality, Texas ranks 48th in administering vaccines per capita. The average daily deaths here have nearly doubled, and daily cases have increased by 75% over the last 10 days. New infections now more than they were when the statewide mask mandate went into effect last July.
Since the vaccine is not really readily available, I just don't really feel comfortable putting all my staff at risk.
And while some celebrate,
if you want to wear a mask, you're more than welcome to. Are we going to require any of it? Absolutely not.
Others are wary.
I know everybody's anxious. I'm anxious, but I think a few more weeks, month, maybe whatever number may be, shouldn't hurt anybody.
Chef Ty Frazier tells me he will keep following CDC guidelines.
What happens when the surge goes up and then we have to shut down again?
Containing the virus crucial as the race to vaccinate picks up speed. 9 FEMA locations opening around the country today, from Pennsylvania to Florida. And at this one in New York, long lines before doors even opened.
The first day they said you could apply, I did, and I got right on.
And this is what it looked like inside the Javits Center. It can now open around the clock. That site able to vaccinate 8,000 people a day.
I got it.
Tonight, President-elect Joe Biden rolling up his sleeve, getting Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine.
I'm doing this to demonstrate that people should be prepared when it's available to take the vaccine. There's nothing to worry about.
Biden hoping to reassure Americans the vaccine is safe. And tonight, the CDC recommending who should get the vaccine after frontline healthcare workers and those in nursing homes. Next will be people over 75 and frontline essential workers, including police, firefighters, teachers, grocery store and postal workers. Next in line, people 16 to 64 with high-risk medical conditions and essential workers in industries like food service, construction, and public safety. States get the final say on who gets the vaccine. Unlike Pfizer's vaccine, Moderna's doesn't require special freezers and can more easily reach smaller community health centers and rural areas. 5.9 million doses already on the move to 3,500 locations. New York nurse Arlene Ramirez among the first in the state to receive Moderna's shot at the same hospital where she lost her father to the virus.
This vaccine is hope. It's hope that we will cease this pandemic. It's hope that we will live a better life.
Houston Dr. Joseph Verone also got his first dose. He's been on the front lines for nearly 300 days as more than 500,000 people have already received the first dose of Pfizer's vaccine. This vaccine news coming as the country is seeing new COVID highs. In Southern California, where some ICUs are completely full, more than 500 outbreaks linked to businesses, including supermarkets. The state now asking the federal government for medical staff. Hospitals fearing they'll have to ration care.
It is tragic. Our country, the president and I and all of us, we grieve for the loss. Our prayers are extended to the families. of those who have been killed. And it speaks to a larger issue, which is the issue of violence in our country and what we must do to never tolerate it and to always speak out against it. The investigation is ongoing. We don't yet know, we're not yet clear about the motive. But I do want to say to our Asian American community that we stand with you and understand how this has frightened and shocked and outraged all people. But knowing the increasing level of hate crime against our Asian American brothers and sisters, we also want to speak out in solidarity with them and acknowledge that none of us should ever be silent in the face of any form of hate.
United States' Vice President Kamala Harris's niece, Meena Harris, is really copping it online after she tweeted that the suspected shooter in Colorado was white. Meena had to delete the tweet after she was accused of racial profiling by assuming that the man that killed 10 people at a Boulder grocery store was white, but he was actually Syrian. Harris tweeted, "The Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country." She later apologised for making the assumption. "I deleted a previous tweet about the suspect in the Boulder shooting. I made an assumption based on his being taken into custody alive and the fact that the majority of mass shootings in the US are carried out by white men." According to reports, the man that carried out the shooting is Syrian but has lived in the US most of his life. But of course, Meena Harris's tweet came with a lot of backlash and people were not shy in calling her out. Drew Holden said, "Feel like we have a word for rushing to make assumptions about someone accused of a crime based on racial trends in crime." Followed with, "Cannot believe the sister of the Vice President is going to get away with sorry for doing a racism, but I just figured, you know." Another said, "Majority of mass shootings in the United States are not carried out by white men, and even if they were, learn about basic statistical fallacies. The fact near zero number of people ever commit a mass shooting or act of terrorism is more important than X% of race does shootings." And finally, "Maybe you can do better than assume things about tragic events for retweets. Is that too much to ask?" It's not the first time the VP's niece has come under spotlight. Last month, the LA Times reported that the White House had to tell Meena to stop using her aunt's name to promote her own brand.
Asian Americans shaken by the shootings in Atlanta and a rising tide of hate sparked by the coronavirus pandemic.
The whole Asian fever, it made me feel gross. I couldn't be comfortable in my skin.
There's no desire to see me as a person. There's no desire to get to know me. It's purely I've made up my mind about who you are and I hate you for it.
President Biden wants Congress to pass a COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which he says will speed up the federal government's response to the rise in violence and discrimination against Asian Americans.
Hate and violence often hide in plain sight. It's often met with silence. That's been true throughout our history, but that has to change.
The president, speaking in Georgia, where shootings targeting spas in the Atlanta area left 8 people dead this week, including 6 women of Asian descent, and calls are growing for hate crimes charges to be filed against the suspect.
As you observed, I'm a fairly practical guy. I want to get things done. I want to get them done consistent with what we promised the American people. And in order to do that, in a 50-50 Senate, we've got to get to the place where I get 50 votes so that the Vice President of the United States can break the tie, or I get 51 votes without her. And so I'm going to say something outrageous. I have never been particularly poor at calculating how to get things done in the United States Senate. So the best way to get something done, if it holds near and dear to you that you like to be able to, anyway, we're going to get a lot done. And if we have to, if there's complete lockdown and chaos as a consequence of the filibuster, then we'll have to go beyond what I'm talking about. Okay, hang on. Sorry. Oh, Ms. Kim.
Dr. Fauci, in a recent British study, David Wiley and others found that no symptomatic reinfections from COVID-19 after following 2,800 patients for several months. In fact, there have been no reports of significant numbers of reinfections after acquiring COVID-19 naturally. Shane Crotty, a virologist at La Jolla Institute for Immunology, concludes from his experiments that the amount of immune memory gained from natural infection would likely prevent the vast majority of people from getting hospitalized disease, severe disease for many years. In this study, which was published in Science, Dr. Crotty showed that antibody levels stayed relatively constant with only modest declines over 6 to 8 months. Dr. Crotty reported that, notably, memory B cells specific for the spike protein, or RBD, were detected in almost all COVID-19 cases with no apparent half-life at 5 to 8 months after infection. In other words, Dr. Crotty found significant evidence of long-term immunity after COVID infection. Furthermore, Dr. Crotty noted B-cell memory to some other infections has been observed for as long as 60-plus years after smallpox vaccination, or even 90 years after a natural infection with influenza. That was a woman who got the Spanish flu, still showed immunity 90 years later. So rather than being pessimistic towards people gaining immunity after they've had COVID or had a vaccine, studies argue for significant optimism. In fact, there have been no scientific studies arguing or proving that infection with COVID does not create immunity. There have been no studies showing significant numbers of reinfections. Of the 30 million Americans who have had COVID, only a handful of reinfections have been discovered. In fact, the New York Times reported last fall more than 38 million people at the time worldwide had been infected with the coronavirus, and as of that date, fewer than 5 of these cases had been confirmed by scientists to be reinfections. Scientists interviewed for the article concluded, in most cases, a second bout with the virus produced milder symptoms or none at all. Given that no scientific studies have shown significant numbers of reinfections of patients previously infected or previously vaccinated, what specific studies do you cite to argue that the public should be wearing masks well into 2022?
I'm not sure I understand the connection of what you're saying about masks and reinfection. We're talking about people who have never been infected before.
You're telling everybody to wear a mask, whether they've had an infection or a vaccine. What I'm saying is they have immunity, and everybody agrees they have immunity. What studies do you have that people that have had the vaccine or have had the infection are spreading the infection? If we're not spreading the infection, isn't it just theater?
No, it's
not.
not.
The vaccine and you're wearing 2 masks. Isn't that theater?
No, that's not. Here we go again with the theater. Let's get down to the facts. Okay, the studies that you quote from Crotty and Sete look at in vitro examination of memory immunity, which in their paper they specifically say this does not necessarily pertain to the actual protection. It's in vitro.
And what studies can you point to that show significant reinfection? There are no studies that show significant reinfection.
Let me finish the response to your question, if you please. The other thing is that when you talk about reinfection and you don't keep in the concept of variants, that's an entirely different ballgame. That's a good reason for a mask. In the South African study conducted by J&J, they found that people who were infected with wild type and were exposed to the variant in South Africa, the 351, it was as if they had never been infected before. They had no protection. So when you talk about reinfection, you've got to make sure you're talking about wild type. I agree with you that you very likely would have protection from wild type for at least 6 months if you're infected. But we in our country now have variants that are circulating.
Significant reinfection. What study shows significant reinfection, hospitalization, and death after either natural infection or the vaccine? It doesn't exist. There is no evidence that there are significant reinfections after vaccine. In fact, I don't think we have a hospitalization in the United States after the 2-week period after the second vaccination. We don't have a death in the United States.
You're not hearing what I'm saying about variants. We're talking about wild type versus variants.
And what proof is there that there are significant reinfections with hospitalizations and death from the variants? None in our country. Zero.
Well, because we don't have a prevalent of a variant yet. We're having one, can I finish? We're
But
having
you're talking about
117 that's
conjecture.
becoming
You're
more
making your
dominant.
policy based on conjecture.
No,
you
it-
have the
it isn't
conjecture that
based
we're
on
going to get
conjecture.
variants, so you want people to wear a mask for another couple years.
No.
You've been vaccinated, and you parade around in 2 masks for show.
No.
You can't get it again. There's virtually 0% chance you're going to get it, and yet you're telling people that have had the vaccine, who have immunity. You're defying everything we know about immunity by telling people to wear a mask who've been vaccinated. Instead, you should be saying there is no science to say we're going to have a problem from the large number of people being vaccinated. You want to get rid of vaccine hesitancy? Tell them they can quit wearing their mask after they get the vaccine. You want people to get the vaccine? Give them a reward instead of telling them that the nanny state's going to be there for 3 more years and you got to wear a mask forever. People don't want to hear it. There's no science behind it.
Well,
If you could respond to the question so that we could all understand the difference between the vaccine in controlling the wild type versus the variants that are out there and the reason for wearing a mask, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, yes. First of all, when you have a variant, you have an immunity that you get what's convalescent sera and the same sort of thing. If I vaccinate you or me against the wild type, you get a certain level of antibody that's specific for a particular viral strain. If there's a circulating variant, you don't necessarily have it. You have some spillover immunity to be sure, but you diminish by anywhere from 2 to 8-fold the protection. So the point I'm saying is that there are variants in now circulating. The point that Senator Paul was making was that if you look at wild type only, there is some clear-cut credence to what he's saying. But we are living right now in a situation where we're having a dominance of 117, which was the original UK. We have a very troublesome variant in New York City, a 526. We've got 2 variants in California, a 427, 429, and we have a number of others. So we're not dealing with a static situation of the same virus.
If somebody has gotten both vaccines for Moderna and Pfizer, or just the one for J&J, and 2 weeks have passed, why does that person need to wear a mask if they go in public?
Well, you know, if you look at the science overall, you have to sort of determine what level of evidence are you willing to sort of, make these decisions on. It makes a lot of sense, I think, that if it's just the wild type virus that's circulating, the one that we've been talking about for the last year, you take the vaccine, it should reduce the viral load that you could potentially carry, make it unlikely that you're infected, and even less likely that you could transmit it to others. But I think there's 2 points that keep coming up. One is that there's still a lot of virus out there. So, when you have that much virus out there, could you still actually be exposed, and even though it's unlikely, become an inadvertent carrier? But the other, and at some point when we get to low enough level, which is a few thousand cases per day, not several, not 40 or 50,000 cases per day, you could say at that point the likelihood of someone being exposed is so small, we could start to not worry about masks. There's another point, just quickly, Jake. People who are vaccinated, they get exposed to the virus learns then how to sort of adapt and mutate now to a vaccinated person. So in some ways, by exposing vaccinated people to the virus, you could start to inspire more and more mutations, which is something you don't want to do. So until the vaccine is contained, the virus is contained, I think, masks, at least in public, will be recommended.
No, I wouldn't. And we had the border the most secure, they say, in 20 years. But really, I think from the beginning, it's never been like this. We built almost 500 miles of wall, and it was new wall. They like to say renovation. The renovation was we knocked down the old wall and we built a new wall, and then they call it a renovation. But this was new wall and incredible wall that was, really did a job. In addition to that, Mexico worked great with us. We had a tremendous relationship, and me with the president, who's a tremendous person. And they gave us 28,000 soldiers along our border, and they stopped people from coming in. And what you're doing now and what you're seeing now is inhumane. These children and people are a tremendous number of children, by the way, but they're living on top of each other in squalor. This is squalor. That's why they won't allow the press to come in. We let the press go in, and we had much smaller numbers, frankly, because people couldn't come up. But we let the press come in, but they're living in very dangerous conditions. There's no testing for COVID-19, as we call it sometimes. Sometimes we call it something else. But there's no testing. There's no nothing. And What's going on is just absolutely insane. It's a horrible situation. And everyone that's seen it, nobody's seen worse. Nobody's seen anything like it. And if you get cameras inside some of those facilities, you would see children on top of children, and you'd see filth, and you'd see things that you would not believe possible.
Well, I want to move on to a claim that Biden made about your administration's treatment of the migrant children. Watch.
If an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let him starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that either, except Trump. I'm not going to do it.
He was accusing you of starving people who were wanting to come across the Rio Grande or the border to the United States. Your reaction?
Well, first of all, it's just the opposite. But by the time we finished what we were doing, very few people were coming up because they knew they weren't going to get through. We stopped catch and release, which was a disaster. That's where you catch somebody, take their name, and release them into our country. We stopped that. They were supposed to come back years later and go to court, but nobody ever comes back and goes to court. And the very biggest thing was we had the stay in Mexico policy, and that means that we wouldn't allow people to wait in our country until they were totally checked out, which most of them didn't get checked out, and they would go back to their own country. If young kids were with parents, but a lot of times they weren't, and we would take care of them. But it is what they're doing now is outrageous, and they should finish the wall. If they finish the wall, they'd be able to have a lot of people are right now staying in the few openings. We have openings in the wall that were going to be closed up, could have been done over the next month. If it weren't for the fact that we got sued 11 times, many of the suits by Congress and people in Congress and Democrats, we would have had the wall. It was almost completed, but it took 2.5 years to get the final sign-offs from the court victories that we had. We had great court victories, but they sued us for 2.5 years, and they were suing us on the financing, on the environment, on lots of things. We won the lawsuits, and we built almost 500 miles. They should immediately seal it up and finish it up, and you would see a lot of good things happen. But nobody knows exactly what they're doing.
Mr. President, what was your just general reaction to the way Biden handled the so-called press conference today? You know, he read quite a bit from reference notes, but he did take some questions. It was unusual, to say the least.
Well, they were strange questions, and they were asked in a very interesting way. It was like softballs, like you're throwing softballs up, and it's just a different world. Nobody's seen anything like it. You know it. You know it better than anybody. You cover it so well, and it's very sad to watch. Actually, they're feeding him questions. They're easy questions. I noticed Peter Doocy didn't get to ask a question today, and there could be no difficult questions, and they're ready to rip the microphone away if somebody did get a little bit testy. Look, the whole thing is ridiculous. You know it, and so do I.
Well, where was there Jim Acosta?
So do
Mr. President, where was there Jim Acosta? I mean, they'd have Acosta like in your face every day, and others like him.
They don't have that, yeah. And if Jim Acosta were there, he'd ask very soft questions. It would be a whole different thing.
The Democrats are also saying that a problem here is that apparently America is not sending enough U.S. taxpayer dollars to Central America to solve or alleviate this border crisis. Here was Nancy Pelosi today.
The then president, had withdrawn the money that was allocated for the Northern Triangle. That was a mistake, and we have to restore that. They withdrew the money to punish those countries.
Mr. President, did you withdraw money from Central America to punish them?
Absolutely, that's right. On that, I agree with her. First time in a long time, years, that I've agreed with her. We were paying them $500 million a year. Nobody knew what they were doing with the money, and they were sending criminals to our country. You know, when they're sending people in the caravans, as we call them, they're not exactly their finest, okay? And more importantly, perhaps, is that they wouldn't take it as we would, because ICE was incredible, the job they did, and Border Patrol, incredible. These are incredible men and women. When we got somebody, we captured a bad MS-13 or group, we'd bring them back to the country, and they wouldn't take them. And I said, what are we doing? How much money do we give them? We pay them $500 million a year. I said, stop paying the money immediately. We stopped paying. They called the following day. They said, we'd love to have MS-13 come back into our country. Please send them immediately, and we will not be sending any more bad people. And we then got along very well with them. So she's absolutely right. They abused us in so many different ways. They wouldn't take prisoners and murderers back, and we didn't want them in our country. So we'd bring them back. They wouldn't take them. I stopped paying the $500 million that we were wasting on giving it to them. As soon as I did that, they immediately agreed to take back everybody. They said it would be a great honor to take them back. Please send them immediately.
Yeah. Mr. President, today NBC News reporting that the DHS, of course, it was created after 9/11 to protect America from international terrorism. Now, they're moving toward what Intel officials are now saying is the new top threat, domestic violent extremism. That includes apparently surveilling social media. Here's what they mean. There's a quote from the article. The idea is to identify people who may, through their social media behavior, be prone to influence by toxic messaging spread by foreign governments, terrorists, and domestic extremists. Mr. President, their DHS is going after people who may be your supporters, who they believe are domestic extremists because they say things like, let's take back our government. Are you concerned about that?
What I'm concerned about is Antifa and BLM and some of the horrible things that we witnessed over the last, frankly, long period of time when they take over Portland and they take over the courthouse and they destroy the building. You have to see what they've done to the building over the years. And just over the last few weeks, they've been having massive riots and other things in Portland, and even the crazy mayor. This mayor is just absolutely, he's a radical left, and he can't take it anymore. He's actually said he can't take it anymore. You have to see what the streets of Portland look like. They've been burning the city down, and nobody does anything about it. And they don't go after those people, but they go after people that I guess you'd call them lean toward the right. And they wave American flags. In many cases, they're waving the American flag, and they love our country. And those people, they're arresting them by the dozens, but they don't go after Antifa, who kill people, by the way, who burn down our cities. Look at what they did to Seattle. They took over a big parcel of land in Seattle, a big portion of the city. And had I not gotten the National Guard ready to go in, we were going in the following morning. They just gave up the land. The same thing in Minnesota. In Minneapolis, they took over the city. Had we not gotten the National Guard in there, you would not have Minneapolis anymore. It would have been burned down to the ground.